Likutei Sichos, Chelik Yudches, volume 18, the fifth sicha for Parshas Nasso. This sicha, the Rebbe will explain several Rashis pertaining to the inaugurative offerings of the Nesiim, the leaders of the tribes. Now, this is not going to be your, quote, typical Rashi sicha, or, the conventional Rashi sicha that goes into the nitty-gritty back and forth of a specific Rashi or two. Rather, it's going to combine several Rashis in several verses and give us a clear picture as to what really is going on here. Now, I would strongly encourage you to review the Rashi's inside to be more familiar with them, and that is from Perek Zayim, chapter 7, Psukim Yutes through Chav Gimel, the verses 19 through 23. Just as an introduction, something to be familiar with, the four groups, so to speak, that exist in the world: Doimim, Tzemeach, Chai, and Medaber. But more specifically, we're going to focus on Doimim, Tzemeach, Chai, which is Doimim is the inanimate, the mineral life, as they call it. Tzemeach is what we say the plant life, the greenery, things that grow. And Chai is the living life, which is animals and so on. So let's get into the Rashi. In chapter 7, verse 19 and on, the Rebbe says, Rashi, and as he specifically points out at the end, he says, founded and based on the teachings of Ramosha the Darshan, he explains one Rashi after another, one verse after another, how all these numbers hint, allude, correspond to very specific and significant happenings, significant events and facts in history of the past and of the current, meaning of the present, as this is unfolding, the Korbanis and the Nesiim. For example, he starts with the silver ball, Karas Kesef, and he says that if you add up the numerical value of the letters of Karas Kesef, you come out with 930, which corresponds to the age of Adam Arisha and the amount of years he lived. Then he goes to Mizrak Echad Kesef, which is one silver sprinkling basin, which again, he says, adds up to the number 520, which this alludes to the age that Noach was when he began, he said, to Lahami Toldos, to begin to raise a family, began to have children. Then he has the Kaf Achas, the one spoon. So he says the one spoon, this refers to the Torah, which was given from the hand of the one, meaning the hand from Hashem. And then, when it comes to Par Echad, Ayel Echad, Keves Echad, why the young bullock, why the young ram, and the young lamb, why these three different type of animals? So he says this corresponds to the three avos, and he goes on to explain in detail how each one, how the par corresponds to Avrohom Avinu, and so on and so forth. Then he goes to the Sir Izim Lechatos, this young he-goat for a sin offering. Well, he says this is to atone for the sale of Yosef HaTzadik. And then, when it comes to Lezevach HaShlomim for the peace offering, he says, Bakar Shnayim. Why is it two cattle? He says, well, this is corresponding to Moshe and Aaron. And then when it comes to the Elim, Atudim, and Kvasim, which is the rams, the goats, and the lambs, which each one, it says, Elim Chamisha, each one was 5. So he says, the Elim, Atudim, and Kvasim, this corresponds to the three different types of Jews, Koyanim, Levim, Yisraelim. And then also he says it corresponds to Torah, Nevi'im, and Ksuvim, the Tanakh. And then he says the 5s, they correspond to the 5 books of the Torah, the 5 commandments, which is on one tablet, on one side, and the 5 commandments, which are on the other side, the other tablet. Now, of course, the obvious question, so to speak, the elephant in the room is, why does Rashi even give us all these remuzim, all these hints, and all these allusions, what it alludes to? The fact is that Rashi always explains only and exclusively Pshuta Shel Mikra. Well, the answer is, from the fact that the Torah did not suffice in just telling us what the first day's offering was, and then commence by saying the second day was this and this nasi, for this and this representing such and such a tribe, and he brought ditto what the one before him brought, exactly the same. And this kind of could have saved so much time and space just saying that, how each one, just giving us the order and saying each one brought exactly the same thing. But rather, by the fact that the Torah goes and repeats everything in detail, it is clear and obvious that, notwithstanding the fact that on the surface they all seem to be the same, but the kavanah, the intent, so to speak, the esoterics behind it, that was very specific and different from one Nasi to another, and therefore Rashi was left with no choice, and this becomes Pshutei Shel Mikra, where he needs to point it out for us. Now, it's true that Rashi only explains the second day. He doesn't go into detail about the other days, and that's because it's true that each and every Nasi had his own pratistic, his own personal, so to speak, his own intimate kavana, but the general kavana gets more expressed in this one over here, once it's been repeated a second time. This was the general kavana, and then in addition, each Nasi had his own kavana. So we've explained why Rashi approaches the matter in the first place. However, there's still a lot to be understood. Number one, it's obvious that all these remazim, all these hints, all these things that are alluded to here are not just random remazim that happen to come together, happen just to fall in some kind of formation. No, in this formation. Rather, that is very specific. There's a systematic remez over here. In other words, it begins at a certain point and it commences with a certain point. So the question becomes, if that's the case, if you look at the remazim, there seems to be something odd. It's not consistent. It's not going consistently from, progressively from the beginning to the commencing point, which is now as they are inaugurating the Mizbeach. How so? Well, it begins with Avrohom and Noach, and then it jumps to Kaf Achas, to the one spoon, which Rashi says corresponds, hints to the Torah which was given by Hashem's hand, by one God. Kaf is like a hand. But the question is, right after that, it jumps back, so to speak, to the Avos, to the patriarchs, Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, and then to the sale of Yosef. So it's not in order, right? So that's one general question. Another question is, he says, Kaf Achas, that what is this one spoon, right? This corresponds to the Torah which is given from the one hand, from one kaf, from the palm of Hashem. Then he says, Elim, Atudim, Ukvasim, that the rams, the he-goats, and the lambs, these are all reference to the 5 books of the Torah, to the Torah and Nevi'im and Ksuvim. Why do you need to have 2 separate hints for the very same thing for the Torah? You hinted already in the one spoon, now it gets hinted again much later on in the progression of the Ramazim. That's one question. Another question, when you look at the word at how Rashi addresses Elim, Atudim, and Kvasim, again, the rams, the Atudim, are the he-goats, and the Kvasim, the lambs. He says like this, he says, Keneged Koyanim Levim Yisrael. This corresponds to the 3 different types of Jews. Koyanim, Levim, Yisrael. And then he continues, and it is Keneged Torah Nevi'im Ksuvim. He doesn't say it in the form of another Pirush, or perhaps an alternative way of looking at it. He kind of bunches it together and seems to connect the two. So this seems to imply that it is one thing. It's part and parcel. The 3 types of Jews and the 3 sections of the Torah, the Tanakh, seem to go together. What is the connection between the two? How do they connect? How does the same thing, Merames, how does it hint to these 2 different things? Another question. Rashi mentions the Chamishe Chumshei Torah in the 5 books of the Torah when he addresses the 5s, why 5 it is, 5 of that, 5 of that. First he addresses the Chamishe Chumshei Torah, the 5 books of the Torah, and only afterwards does he mention the 5 commandments that are on one tablet and the 5 commandments on the other tablet. Well, it seems to be out of order. First, you would mention the 5 commandments on the first tablet, the 5 commandments on the second tablet, and then the 5 books of the Torah, which came afterwards, obviously. So this obviously compels us to intimate from Rashi that he's not referring to the actual original Aseres Adibros which are on the Luchos, but rather he's talking about the commandments as they appear already after we already have the Chamisha Chumshei Torah, meaning as they appear in the Chamisha Chumshei Torah, in the 5 books of the Torah. So then what is it? So we need to understand. Since we already had a remez, since we already had a hint that includes the entirety of the Torah, why is there a need to now specifically point out these 10 commandments? If we're already talking about the Torah as it is, the 5 books of the Torah, then it's another part of the Torah. It's included in the whole Torah. So to understand, this is only some of the questions that Rebbe points out. To understand over this, says the Rebbe, we have to first address a very general question. What are all these korbanos for? In other words, what are all these offerings all about? So we say this is Chanukas HaMizbeach. This is to inaugurate the Mizbeach, the altar. So therefore it's understood that the focus here, the emphasis, has to be the emphasis of the Korbanos HaNesiyim is what? Is for the purpose of inaugurating the Mizbeach, meaning to bring out the greatness, to bring out the effect of the Mizbeach, to bring out what now has been inaugurated. Now, what is the Mizbeach for? The Mizbeach is to offer actual animal offerings. That is the purpose of the Mizbeach that they're inaugurating right now. So the question is, why do we begin when we enumerate, when the Torah enumerates and spells out in detail what their inauguration offering was, the inaugurative offering that is? What does the Torah spell out? Karas kesef, a silver bowl, and a spoon, and a sprinkling basin. Why does the Torah go into it? Why does the Torah mention that and mention the ktoiras, the incense, the smelling spices, and mention the meal offering, and only afterwards does it go into the detail and spell out, point out all the various animals that are being offered? It would seem that first it should mention that. It first have to be, so to speak, express the actual transformation that's taking place over the accomplishment of the Mizbeach, which is in contrast to what was till now. You see, till now, meaning up to the point that this Mizbeach is being inaugurated, there was a concept of offerings that one would bring to Hashem. But these offerings did not have the power of transformation. Okay? They didn't have the power of visual, actual, literal transformation that happened only with the inauguration of the Mizbeach. As the Torah will spell out later, that once they put on the korbanos on the Mizbeach, it says, "Vateitze eish milifnei Hashem vatoichel al Mizbeach," that a fire came down and consumed everything that was on Mizbeach, transformed it into Kedusha, and they can actually see visually with their physical eyes, they can see how everything is being elevated to Hashem. This did not happen until now. And therefore, in that sense, everything that happened until now, all the offerings that happened until now, were more like on the level of the doimim, the inanimate. It didn't have that life. It didn't have that spiritual life. It didn't have that transformation, which took a physical object and transformed it into something holy, making it alive, true life. And therefore, says the Rebbe, this is the order. This is the way it was divided. Their offering, their gift, their inaugurative offering for the Mizbeach came in the form of being divided into 2 categories. First, there were the various vessels. There was the ktoiras, there was the mincha, which doesn't come from chai, it doesn't come from living animals. It comes from the inanimate, or at least from tzemeach, which is more in that category. When you divide into 2, it's not something which is as alive as a living thing, as an animal which moves, walks, comes, and so on. Comes and goes. Then the second phase, so to speak, the second part of their gift, of their inaugurative offering, were the various animals that come from chai, that come from the living. And they were visually transformed into the ultimate sense of life. They were visually transformed into Kedusha by the fire coming down and consuming it and bringing it up to Hashem. So all this whole idea that the Gashmius is able to transform and become Ruchnius, meaning the inanimate, so to speak, the dead, the lifeless, is able to transform and become alive. This all began when? When did this really begin? This began at Matan Torah, when Hashem gave us the Torah. However, although it actually began at Matan Torah in the grandest sense, meaning in full scale, but already it began, its early steps began already with Avrohom Avinu when he got the mitzvah of Bris Milah. And of course, not only Avrohom, then Yitzchak and Yaakov and so on. Meaning already by them it began this concept, this idea of taking Gashmias, of taking something of the matter and transforming it into the spirit, or connecting it to the spirit, and now embedding into it Kedusha, and therefore, quote, making it alive. And therefore, now we're ready to begin to appreciate the order. It begins with Adam and Noach, because everything here is symbolic of what the Mizbeach is doing, what's happening over here. What's happening over here is history is changing. So we go to the beginning of history, we go to Adam, we go to Noach, and then we go to the Kaf Achas, to the quote, the spoon, which represents the giving of the Torah, as Hashem gave us the Torah, and then we immediately go back to Avrohom, and then to Yosef, and so on, because that is connected to the giving of the Torah. Once we have the mention, the idea, the awareness of the Torah, of course we cannot ignore, we cannot look away from the fact that that already began in its early steps. The most early stage, not advanced stage, but an early stage, it began already by Avrohom Avinu. And in an advanced stage, it actually was fully implemented when Hashem gave us the Torah. And that's why the order makes sense now. So that answers that question. However, you can still ask, if that's the case, how can this idea of a one spoon, we said that the spoon is an inanimate thing. The gold, the spoon, kaf achas asarazov. Whoa. There's the 10 gold. That the spoon is inanimate. So how does that serve as a remez for the Torah? So the answer is, that's why Rashi emphasizes. It's not the Torah and the Taryag mitzvahs as they are, but as, quote, as they were given from Hashem's hand. As they were given from Hashem's hand. What did Hashem give us? What was given from Hashem's hand? The 10 Commandments as they were on the luchos, which actually the luchos, the tablets, are inanimate. And as we'll soon better appreciate it, in that stage, although it's the potential for all the Torah mitzvahs, but it's not yet alive in the sense that we are now, so to speak, celebrating as we celebrate the inauguration of the Mizbeach. And then he continues. Asara Zahav. What is the weight of it, the 10 gold shekel? What does that correspond to? The Aseres HaDibros. The Aseres HaDibros, the 10 Commandments. And then he continues, Melei Ktoiros, the word Melei Ktoiros, that is full of Ktoiros, that is a numerical value of Taryag, 613. Says the Rebbe, this is not referring to the Torah mitzvahs as we have it, once that we have the Torah and once we, the Jewish people, implement it and actually do something with it to transform the Gashmias, as is expressed now in the inauguration of the Mishkan, connecting the physical and the spiritual. Rather, this refers to as the Taryag mitzvahs, the 613 mitzvahs, as they are subliminally hinted to, they are hidden in the 10 Commandments, which are written on the luchos, which again, we say now is being merumos in this inanimate thing, because it's still not yet in an implementive state. Why? Because the way the Torah and mitzvahs come from Hashem, this is only the potential, but they're not quote-unquote alive yet in the Gashmis. It's as if it's daimim. They are holy. They're essentially holy. But they don't have, so to speak, that effect on the world. It only has the potential there. Only after it comes down into the world. And the Yid acts on it. And the Yid actually implements it. Then he takes the doimim, whatever the doimim is, whatever the matter of the world is, the physical matter, and transforms it into something holy. He now, quote, makes it alive. Now we can also understand why Rashi, when he says the Elim, Atudim, and Kevasim, he says in the same Rashi, without making differentiation or distinction, he makes it as a one flowing pirush. He says this corresponds to Koyanim Levim Yisraelim, which means the totality of the Jewish people, and the Torah Nevi'im Suvim. So because that's what that says, but that's the idea. The fact that the Torah, quote unquote, comes alive or makes the Gashmiistic world, makes the matter transform to life, that's not essentially from itself, but rather only after it connects to the Jew and it is implemented. It is, so to speak, acted on by the Jew. When the Koyanim Levim Yisraelim come together with the Torah Nevi'im Ksuvim, now the Torah has that effect that is being merumas, that is being expressed, that is being hinted in, quote, the animals, meaning it's a live thing. And now it becomes alive. And now we can understand another point, another thing that Rashi says. After that, he goes on and he says, oh, this corresponds, the number's 5. Why 5 rams and 5 he-goats and 5 chumashim, the 5 sections of the Torah, and then the 5 commandments. Again, this is a continuation of this. Not like it was hinted before when in the phase where we're saying it was given from the hand of Hashem, where there's still doimim. Over there it's 10. It's 10. There's no real big distinction between the first 5, the other 5. But now, once we have the Torah as it connects to the Jew, as it's now in the phase where it's being implemented by the Jew, it is being effectively used to transform the world. Now you have an expression of Chamisha Chumshe Torah. It's a whole entire different concept. Now you have different commandments than before. You have a different Torah than before. What is that? You have 5 books. Each book has its own expression, with its own topics, its own theme. So there's already an expression here. There's a difference between one book and the other. And then you have the commandments that appear in the Seres HaDibros, but they're not just one chunk. They're not just one unit. There's 2 sections here. You have the 5 dibros that are on one side, which expresses the mitzvah aseh, and then you have the 5 dibros on the other side, the 5 commandments which are quote on the other side, which is the lois aseh, the negative commandments, which again has a totally different expression. But this already only has this expression and this value only after, quote, the Torah connects to the Jew. But when the Torah was given directly from Hashem's hand, it's Hasara, it's 10, it's all one thing, because it's all still in a doimim. You don't see the life, and therefore you don't see the expression.